Hello, good afternoon. Welcome everyone to our seminar today. We are very pleased to say hello to everyone. We're celebrating a very special day because yesterday we published our 6th report on the status of implementation of the peace agreement in Colombia, and it has the title 5 years after the signing of the Colombian final agreement, reflections from implementation monitoring. My name is Josefina Chavarria, and I'm the director of the Peace Accords Matrix at the Kroc Institute at the University of Notre Dame. Today, I am joined by Gerard Martin, Peace Accords Matrix representative in Colombia, by Brenda Forero, report editor for the Barometer Initiative, and by Patrick McQuestion, research associate of the Peace Accords Matrix. Good morning, Gerard, Brenda, and Patrick. It's lovely to see you.
Good morning.
The Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies is part of the Keough School of Global Affairs at the University of Notre Dame and is one of the leading peace research and study centers in the world. One of its main programs is the Peace Accords Matrix, or we call it PAM, which created the most comprehensive database regarding the implementation of 34 peace accords around the world. By mandate of the government of Colombia and the former FARC-EP, signatory parties of the final agreement to end the armed conflict and build a stable and lasting peace, the Kroc Institute is responsible for providing technical support to the international component of verification and monitoring the implementation of the peace accord in real time. The Kroc Institute has released up until now 5 prior reports on the status of overall implementation, as well as 3 reports on implementation of gender provisions and 2 reports on implementation of ethnic provisions. So we're very happy to share with you the main findings of this 6th comprehensive report. Throughout the following 90 minutes, and along with the PAM Barometer team, we want to offer a panoramic view of the current state of implementation of the peace accord and share with all of you our data and most recent analysis, which you can read in more detail on the report on our website, peaceaccords.nd.edu. So we will speak about the special features of the 6th comprehensive report and the research methodology that we used, as well as share with you an analysis of international cases in a comparative perspective. We shed light on key aspects of implementation during the 5th year. Then we will dive deeper into the Colombian case with a quantitative analysis following the PAM matrix, and we will also discuss the framework plan for implementation. You will have the opportunity to listen to the cross-cutting gender and ethnic approaches and review the key progress, obstacles, and opportunities in each of the 6 chapters of the final accord. In the last section of the presentation, you will learn about the key findings and opportunities to strengthen implementation in the future. The panelists should take a maximum of 60 minutes for this presentation, since we want to reserve enough time for questions and answers. So on the one hand, we want to thank all of you who have sent your questions in advance together with the registration form. And on the other hand, we also would like to have the opportunity to respond to the questions you submit through the chat function here in this Zoom webinar. Just click on chat and let us know if you have any questions or doubts that we can go back at the end of the presentation and find an answer together. So without further ado, let us please start. And I would like to ask Gerard Martin, our PAM representative in Colombia, to please share with us the special characteristics of this new report.
Once again, good morning to all of you who are following us. Good morning, Josefina. On the special characteristics of the report, as usually our comprehensive national report includes the typical sections that we always have, which is the analysis point by point of implementation, the gender, ethnic, territorial, and comparative sections. And during this hour, we will speak to you all of them. But let me just briefly mention 3 special characteristics of our report, which you also see here on this slide. First one, we have a special section on the framework plan for implementation, which is the tool, the public policy tool created by the parties to follow the implementation of the accord. It's a kind of monitoring and evaluation tool of the Colombian government that's complementary to our way of measuring. In our report, we have a special section on the framework plan for implementation. We will speak to you later on it, but we also provide for each point of the accord in this report an analysis of how the implementation is going following this framework plan for implementation. So the second special characteristic to this report, which is the normative framework, the regulatory analysis that supports implementation. So both in a general way and section by section in the report, we pay specific attention to the norms, regulations, laws, and other stipulations have been created following the signature of the accord to help and support and make possible the implementation. This is a very important part, very much related to legislative work on a national level in Colombia. It's sometimes forgotten, and we pay precise and specific attention to this dimension of the implementation. Finally, we have included special tools to make all this work more visual for you to understand the details of the actual status of implementation. And I wanted to call your attention to our website, where we update every 3 months in these kind of visualizations about the implementation. It's a very pedagogical tool, very useful for everybody who wants to keep a close eye on the implementation. Finally, wanted to say something, Josefina. We also have included a context section in the report. We monitor strictly the implementation under our mandate, but as you will understand, it is very important to also pay attention, close attention to how political, social, economic factors and dynamics of context impact the implementation. And these are the 4 that we are mainly stressing in the report. First, the social mobilization and national strike, essentially concentrated in the first semester of 2021, initially very much related to the fiscal reforms introduced in the midst of the pandemic, which produced enormous protests. You may have heard about it, social upheaval, both in the cities and in the rural areas, and also accompanied by expression of violence and human rights violations. So beyond that, however, as we show in this report, that social mobilization had some very interesting sides, positive sides, we could say. First, the social mobilization, which was largely Pacific, was effective. The fiscal reforms were effectively canceled by the government. Second, they permitted to visualize many social demands that had kind of been silenced or invisualized during the pandemic. And part of them are actually related to accord issues that still have to be implemented. So the protest permitted to better understand further needs of accord implementation and how further accord implementation could help overcome issues that were present in these mobilizations. And finally, the social protests created evidence that the peace councils, the so-called peace councils which exist at the municipal, departmental, and national level in Colombia were created and enhanced by the accord, to a certain extent played an effective role in finding peaceful solutions to the conflict at that point. Second, a moderation of the impact of the COVID pandemic during 2021 compared to 2020, with a faster economic reactivation than originally foreseen. That said, the social economic impact of the pandemic in terms of employment, poverty, and inflation, 15% inflation in Colombia during the second semester last year, have had devastating impact on large parts, especially of rural areas, and so only calls for further implementation of the accord to focus on those kind of populations and help them. Third, persistence of security and protection challenges in strategic territories for implementations. issues of conflict, violence, and insecurity essentially persisted and even partially increased during this year compared to the 2020 year, an increase in massacres, an increase of armed organizations confining people to their location, making it difficult to convene and to participate in events. Also, continued selected assassinations of ex-combatants and human rights defenders, although homicides in general reduced over 2021 compared to 2020. And all of this continues to create a difficult context for implementation in many regions. Finally, second semester of 2022 was essentially the second semester of 2021 was essentially already a pre-electoral semester where the attention started to focus more on the 2022 congressional and presidential elections. This created a little risk to leave the debate about the implementation on the sidelines. So we did a lot as Kroc as well to keep the discussion going. That's about it, Josefina.
Thank you very much, Gerard. Thank you for sharing all these ideas and all these considerations that are so important for providing an overall framework to understand the implementation process of last year. Now, I would like to continue with Patrick McQuestion, Research Associate with PAM, in relation to the research methodology that we have used. Patrick, could you please explain how the Barometry Initiative team in Colombia collects information and monitors implementation? And in so doing, can you help us understand a little bit better how we actually gather the information that is then input into our methodology?
Sure, Josefina, thanks, and good morning to everybody again that is with us today. So our team at the Kroc Institute has developed unique methodology that we've been perfecting over the last few years. It is designed to monitor all 6 points of the accord comprehensively and also transversely. So what we do is monitor individual stipulations in the accord that we can then aggregate into topics and subtopics, allowing for comparative analysis across topics and across cases internationally as well. We have 2 submatrices that are focused on the ethnic approach and the gender approach. You'll see in the presentation here 80 stipulations in the ethnic submatrix and 130 in the gender submatrix. These allow us to provide special differential findings on implementation. And what we do then is create monthly coding products of these stipulations. And these allow us to report monthly and also quarterly and annually in these reports and provide some real-time sort of feedback on the status of implementation. We use an ordinal scale that's sort of based on what the PAM program has used in the past. So we look at 4 different levels of coding, 0, 1, 2, and 3, with 0 being non-initiated stipulations and 3 completed stipulations. And then we have minimal and intermediate implementation in the middle. This report emphasizes the role of viability, or what it takes to move stipulations to a 2. So that's an important factor moving forward. And then finally, we use a lot of evidence from a lot of different sources. So as of today, we have over 23,000 implementation events that we use for context and for coding decisions. That's primary and secondary evidence from government as well as civil society organizations and experts. We also refer to reports and media articles as well. And collaboratively, we code each of these stipulations monthly and provide real-time analysis, like I said, for this report and others.
Thank you, Patrick. I think it's quite useful to understand the methodology, and because we're going to see a lot of quantitative data, and I think it's quite important that we understand which are our sources. So apart from these findings, the report also includes a comparative analysis that looks at the Colombian peace process in relation to other peace agreement implementation processes around the world. Gerard, what are some of the biggest takeaways from these comparative findings?
Yes, Josefina. So in this report, in terms of international comparative perspectives, we essentially concentrate on two issues. The Truth Commission mandates, as the Colombian one was extended, and the dispute resolution monitoring and verification mechanisms that are built into many peace accords, including the Colombia ones in terms of the CCV. Which is the committee charged with a dispute resolution between the parties during implementation, created by the accord. So our peace accords matrix has collected international comparative data on 34 accords that we have set to make these measured comparisons. On these two issues, we have our researchers produced the following findings. On the Commission for Truth, Coexistence and Non-Recurrence of Conflict in Colombia, its work was scheduled to last 3.5 years, but at the end of last year, it was granted a 7 months extension due to the pandemic. So now the final report of the Truth Commission in Colombia is due next June 28th, and then there will be an additional 2 months for socialization of the recommendations and the findings in that report. So this extension was actually polemic and criticized from some sides in Colombia. So our researchers at PAM compared 6 cases from the PAM data set that had truth commissions. This included El Salvador, South Africa, Guatemala, Sierra Leone, Nepal, and Liberia. And they found that all these 6 truth commissions actually got their mandate extended beyond the limits established by the original accord at the time of their formation. And on average, our researchers found that this extension amounted to 37% of the original mandate, while the Colombian extension has been 20%. So less than the average and a non-exceptional extension. Furthermore, our researchers found that the COVID pandemic is an external variable that explains this extension, while in the other context, there was no external variable that legitimized the extension. It was just internal work of the Truth Commission. In Colombia, the pandemic created enormous obstacles for the Truth Commissions, whose work requires face-to-face encounters and highly secure channels for testimonies, and so the extension was very reasonable. We therefore explain in this report that the extension of the Colombian Truth Commission mandate was not only necessary, but that it has been a regular practice internationally. On the second point, on the effectiveness of conflict resolution mechanisms, and in particular, the Colombian Commission for Monitoring, Promoting, and Verifying the Implementation of the Accord, the so-called CCV. Such joint deliberation entities always include the signatory parties who meet to resolve short and long-term implementation obstacles. So these kind of bodies actually provide built-in safeguards for implementation is a great thing that was included in the Colombian Accord. Now, our PAM researchers evaluated 7 cases with similar joint deliberation entities and conflict resolution mechanisms created by the Accord, among others, El Salvador, Sierra Leone, once again, Sudan, and Costa Marfil. Ivory Coast. So they found that accords that built in such a conflict resolution mechanism in general registered a 40% higher level of implementation than accords that didn't have such a mechanism to solve conflicts between the parties during implementation. In addition, our researchers found that these mechanisms are most effective when they include an external chair or an impartial third parties or members from the outside who didn't belong to the conflict parties. Now, in Colombia, this is not the case. As I said, the CCV has been created and has been operational, although not always in the best way. But the addition, we find, of an impartial third party or of third parties, such as international mediators or thematic experts within this committee, could increase implementation levels going forward because such external mediators can set impartial agendas and help mediate discussions during charged scenarios. And so, especially also in this time of transition in Colombia, there's a change of a national government. In this report, we stress the importance to take these kind of findings into consideration and to see if the CCV can be made operational by some kind of reform in this kind of sense. Those are essentially the main international perspectives that we included in this report.
Thank you very much, Jed. I think that international perspective is really key and gives us a little bit more of ideas and creative solutions to some obstacles we might be finding. I would like to now turn to Brenda, because we have over 500 provisions in the Kroc Institute methodology, so actually 578. And I was wondering if you could share with us like this overall picture, this wave that we have made that is so well known, this Kroc wave about implementation during 2021.
Good morning, Josefina, and good morning to our audience today. And to answer your question, we would like to show the audience the general graph on the status of implementation of the final agreement. This graph summarizes the status of implementation of the 578 stipulations derived from the text of the final agreement that the Kroc Institute monitors according to its methodology, as Patrick was explaining us. And this graphic shows the result of the investigation carried out by the Kroc Institute since 2016. And as you can see in the waves, as of November 2021, the status of overall implementation stands at 30% of provisions complete, 19% in intermediate status, 37% at minimal implementation status, and 15% uninitiated. A comparison of implementation status between November 2020 and November 2021 reveals that during the fifth year of implementation, 2% of stipulations were completed. And for the third consecutive year, the Kroc Institute observed that implementation has maintained a linear trend characterized by few changes in implementation status. This trend indicates a high probability that the vast majority of stipulations will begin implementation before the 10th anniversary of this process. This is due to the fact that as of this report cutoff date, only 15% of the total stipulations have not begun implementation. As of November 2021, the main challenge facing implementation was the low percentage of provisions at an intermediate stage of implementation and a high percentage at minimal and initiated status, especially those provisions related to comprehensive rural reform and democratic political participation. So for this reason, the Kroc Institute anticipates that a failure to take decisive actions, especially to move most stipulations from an initial phase to an intermediate phase, would reduce the likelihood of completing the 578 stipulations in a timely and effective manner. And I would like to show you now a second graph that more specifically shows the audience the implementation of each point of the agreement. The second graph shows the implementation status of each point of the agreement and also includes a comparison of implementation status between November 2020 and November 2021, as you can see in the bars. And we will share details of each point of the agreement later on, but in general terms, this data lead us to two main conclusions. The Kroc Institute identified that the points of the accord with the highest implementation levels, such as 0.3 and 0.6, are those with the lowest levels of changes in coding during this study period. On the other hand, despite substantive changes in their implementation status during this analysis period, the points of the accord with lower implementation levels, such as 0.1 and 0.2, have a higher concentration of minimum level and non-initiated stipulations. And now I would like to move on to talk to you a little bit about the analysis of the framework plan for implementation, as Gerard was saying. The Kroc Institute uses this governmental tool as a complementary element to enrich implementation analysis. And the report includes an implementation study according to the framework plan of implementation. More specifically, the report includes an analysis of the performance of indicators according to the Integrated Information System for Post-Conflict, SIPO, based in two categories, as you can see in the slide. The first one is early implementation, and this category is about those indicators that should have been completed or should be completed by the end of this presidential administration until 2022. Under this category, it was found that 74% of PMI indicators report overall progress on over 50% of the targets. However, 26% of indicators fall below the level of progress. This 26% is consistent with the low levels of implementation that the Kroc Institute has observed in some of the commitments of the agreement. The highest concentration of indicators with low performance in the short term is in point 4, with 21 indicators. Among them are some related to the National Comprehensive Program for the Substitution of Crops Used for Illicit Purposes, known as PENIS, which has 13 indicators. And the other category is medium and long-term implementation. Those indicators projected to be completed during the next 3 administrations. And under this category, it was found that most of these indicators corresponds to point 1 and point 2. At these points, 82% of indicators should be completed between 2026 and 2031. Given that the commitments in these point 6 structural transformations, it is to be expected that the PMI projects longer periods of time for their fulfillment. However, overall progress based on annual targets in the SIPO system indicates that the gaps in these points are higher in relation to other points. And according to official information, 56% of indicators projected to be completed in 2026 show progress of more than 50% toward the overall goal. However, 44% chose lower levels. And 68% of the indicators projected to be completed by 2031 show progress of more than 33%. Also, there are 2 important findings about this analysis related to the indicators, technical summaries, and regulatory implementation of the agreement. First, 5 years after the signing of the final agreement, a significant proportion of indicators, 67 out of 553 in the SIPO system, lack of a consolidated technical summary. And this is important since these summaries establish indicators, goals, assign responsible entities, and each indicator's start and end dates. And second, that most of the regulatory adjustments envisioned in the agreement are not intended to serve as indicators in the PMI and have played a role in major delays recorded by the Kroc Institute, for example, in point 2.
Thank you, Renda, for those considerations about the overall wave of implementation and also the PMI. Let us now look a little bit more closely at these unique aspects of the Colombian Final Accord, the cross-cutting approaches. We have several ones. Some of them have been so innovative. There's absolutely no comparison from around the world. And one of them is, of course, the gender aspect, and the other one is the ethnic aspect. Patrick, can you share with us the main findings about these 2 cross-cutting approaches, please?
Yeah, sure. This report has 2 sections on these approaches, as well as another section on the territorial approach. So there's a lot more to unpack there. But as you see in this graphic, for example, that shows ethnic implementation, there are lags for these approaches compared to general implementation. Some of them are understandable, others are a little less clear. And we find some clear opportunities for improving their implementation. Here in this graphic, you'll see, for example, that complete stipulations are proportionally lower in the ethnic submatrix than in the general submatrix. Same with the same lag sort of appears in minimum implementation as well, where we have almost twice the amount of stipulations in the ethnic approach lagging. And then behind these numbers, obviously, there's a lot to say, and the report goes into more depth. I should mention also that we recently launched an ethnic report last month that has a lot more content on the ethnic approach in the last year. So this report, though, also goes over some very important milestones. The Special Peace Voting Districts, or SITDIP, was transformative towards the end of 2021. It also included the ethnic approach in many of its procedures and legislation. We saw some effects of this in the elections in March, many opportunities to improve participation, but definitely some headway there. We also saw progress in the special consultation mechanisms for PEDET. These are special instances for the ethnic authorities and representatives to be involved in the planning and implementation of these initiatives. We also saw in the area of PENIS a focus on the ethnic approach, especially on collective territory protocols for substitution. Further consultation is still ongoing, but that's a step in the right direction. Finally, we also found progress in point 5 related to the transitional justice system. A lot of participation from ethnic communities in truth-telling, in the HEP itself during its processes, also prioritized some prosecutions where ethnic communities were victims. The search unit has also included the ethnic communities in some regional search plans. Of course, there are some challenges here that we summarize and others that we found in the report. We cite the IAMPE in multiple occasions because of their oversight on the ethnic chapter in the Accord. They found that 15% of the 10,000 PEDET initiatives with ethnic tags are active. So that means a large proportion are still pending. In the CIPO platform, we see low levels of reporting on some of these PMI indicators with ethnic tags. So that's something to work on going forward. And then and collective reparations is another obstacle that faces financial obstacles, but also logistics. I should also mention the SEV report will be very important for these communities going forward. So that'll be published later this month. And so the next government will have to ensure that the security in different territories are sufficient enough for this report to really make a lot of progress. In terms of opportunities, we see that in PEDET there is always a chance or opportunity for the territorial renewal agency to strengthen initiatives through financing and other participatory mechanisms. Like I mentioned, the SEV report also needs to be appropriated by different actors in Colombia, and the protection unit is another area of opportunity that could improve its use of Decree 660 2018, which has community security measures. Similarly, in the gender approach, we also see lags. Here, you might not see as much of a disparity, but we do see a larger proportion of minimum implementation than general accords, and again, almost 3 times the proportion in completed stipulations. Behind these numbers, again, there's a lot to say. The report goes into some of this, some of the points that you see here. We saw that in point 4, there were some important milestones. In PENIS, we saw the introduction of a gender protocol for substitution. We're also pending an ethnic protocol of similar characteristics, but that was introduced in April 2021. We also saw non-stigmatization measures in drug prevention in point 4. In point 2, we found electoral code reform approved. So that also included gender approaches in legislation and participation measures. Again, the CETEP was very innovative in including these approaches explicitly as well. Among the challenges, we see mainstreaming of the gender approach in PEDET and other programs. You'll see also at the bottom there, CSTEP, the system for the exercise of politics or expression. So the mainstreaming of the gender approach is still something that we want to see improved. And there are continuous security conditions that impact women across the territories. And LGBTQ communities, of course, as well. Some opportunities here that we summarized are the mainstreaming of the PEDET, the gender approach in PEDET and other programs, promoting gender rights in women's organizations, specifically in the CETEP areas, but also more broadly. The UBPD or the Missing Persons Unit could promote LGBTQ individuals' participation in their work plans. And finally, the CCV could also improve the interventions and participation of women in their work sessions.
Thank you very much, Patrick. Just a little reminder to our viewers, at the beginning of our report, you always find the list of abbreviations. You can find all this, CCV is the Commission for Follow-up and Verification, the unit, because sometimes we realize we kind of like start speaking in very technical terms. So you can find it there. And I want to ask all the panelists if they can turn off their cameras, because this is going to allow us to have a little bit more of a conversational exchange about the implementation of the specific topics and chapters of the final accord. Thank you so much. I want to ask Patrick and Brenda if you can summarize for all of us some of the main points of progress, obstacles, and the opportunities for implementation going forward, specifically for each of the chapters of the final peace accord. Thank you.
Sure, Josefina, thanks for that. I'm going to try and summarize some of the takeaways from points 1, 2, and 3, and I think Brenda's going to take 4, 5, and 6. The report has a lot of information, and so it'll be hard to summarize it all, and I encourage everyone to check it out. There's a lot of footnotes too, so there's so many interesting conversations that could be had. But in general terms, points 1 and 2 register relatively low levels of implementation, as you'll see in the report, compared to point 3 or point 6. But that's not to say that things aren't happening. There's a lot behind those numbers. So this past year in point 1, we saw the approval of 4 national plans. So these sectoral plans are very impressive. They include indicators, they have very clear objectives, and they also have financial mechanisms behind them. So this past year we saw education, water and sanitation, labor, as well as economic solidarity approved, bringing the total number to 13 of the 16 plans. Another area in point 1 that we saw some progress was in land access. The National Cadastre made progress in terms of updating the registry of land and use of land. There are obviously obstacles that we can talk about later, but they updated close to 15% of the national territory as of November 2021. So we're hoping that that number continues to increase. The report also does reflect on secondary data. It incorporates an analysis of the multidimensional poverty index in Colombia, and specifically in PEDET zones. So the Statistics Department, DANE, published a report last year showing how the pandemic has adversely affected these communities, and took a look specifically at PEDET and found that poverty has rose between 2019 and 2020 in these zones, especially in rural areas. So it's something to keep an eye on. It provides important context on the priorities for local and national governments in Colombia. In the area of PEDET, we have a very robust section that describes disaggregated data on PEDET initiatives and projects in the territories, as well as by thematic pillars of the program. So I would encourage everyone to refer to the report in terms of that analysis. But We see that participation of communities is a consistent challenge for PADEX. We collect some information on that from sources in the territories as well as NGOs. So I want to turn now to point 2 and describe just some of the milestones there that we include in the report. As Gerard mentioned at the beginning, we do make an emphasis on the legislation aspect of point 2. There's a lot of pending legislation that was called for in the accord that we never saw come to fruition in these years. So political electoral reform, as well as participatory measures. There are certain aspects to participatory planning that are encompassed in some of these legislative proposals that we hope that in the next coming months, especially now in this political transition period, we can see some momentum and agenda building for this for these topics. The electoral mission originally in 2018 had very specific recommendations, so it's just a matter of reinvigorating the conversation. Apart from that legislative aspect, we saw some important legislation passed, especially with the SETEP, or special peace voting districts that I mentioned earlier. These showed some tangible results this year in March. We had some evidence of success in the territories, as well as some areas to improve access to voting. And security issues still provide a consistent obstacle for participation in the territories. We also found some evidence of the Ministry of Technology approving projects in community radio across the territories. So that's another important pedagogical aspect of peace building that we'd like to see improve going forward. Finally, the Territorial Peace and Reconciliation Councils are a pivotal component to peace building in Colombia going forward. They're sort of hubs of many different activities related to the accord. They also act as channels for communication, and this was very evident during the recent wave of protests in 2021. So the report goes into more depth as to how these entities can be strengthened and where they're working successfully and where not. And then finally, I'll just describe point 3 in some depth. Compared to points 1 and 2, point 3 has higher levels of implementation, our report shows, but also that the early processes of demobilization in this point were successful, but there are also some very important commitments that are underway and that are sort of necessary for other processes to go forward. I'm specifically referring to reincorporation of ex-combatants and security measures overall in the territories. So on the one hand, the report shows in great detail how the 13,600 or so FARC ex-combatants are reincorporating into society. They have made progress in terms of starting livelihood projects, but at the same time, there's a lot of work to be done in terms of making these projects sustainable. The report includes a really unique perspective on land access as an opportunity for this population to be successful in reincorporating. So land access involves the purchase of reintegration zones, for example, and also involving a national reincorporation system to help guide a long-term vision of reincorporation. Security measures, on the other hand, we found sort of mixed results, and we were hoping to see a little bit more activity and meetings of the CSEP, which is the system for the exercise of politics, and the National Committee for the Guarantees of Security. Some analysis included in the report refers to homicide and violence statistics, some of the highest that we saw since the accord was signed. So in the UN, for example, found that 65,000 people were forcibly displaced in 2021. That's twice the amount that was displaced in 2020. So there are some important statistics there and analysis that I'd recommend everyone look at. And just to wrap up a little bit there, in point 3, there were some interesting innovations as well from the HEP and the Constitutional Court that played an active role in incentivizing security protocols and implementation in areas like Meta, Cauca, Nariño, Valle del Cauca. So that's something that we thought was unique, and we included a more thorough analysis in the report. And I'll just leave it at that. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Trick. We have now the first point on rural reform, political participation, and the end of conflict. Just a short reminder to our participants here. You can share with us any questions in the chat function. Brenda, would you like to continue with the other points of the accord?
Sure, Josefina. So I will tell you a little bit about point 4, point 5, and point 6. And about point 4, the solution to the illicit drug problem. During this study period, the biggest change recorded by the Kroc Institute in the implementation status of this point was in stipulations that moved from non-initiated to minimum status. And this is important because while 2020 ended with 15% of stipulations uninitiated, this figure was reduced to 9% during 2021. This change is primarily due to stipulations associated with the public health and drug use prevention program, particularly the measures adopted by the Ministry of Health to address the phenomenon of stigmatization of people who use illegal substance, and incorporating also the gender approach in these actions. The Kroc Institute also recorded a 1 percentage point increase in completed stipulations in this point, which rose from 20% in 2020 to 21% in 2021. This increase is related to the adoption of the PNIS communication strategy, the PNIS program, as well as the completion of the exercise to map and characterize the crime of drug trafficking in the context of solutions to the phenomenon of narcotics production and commercialization. The point 4 stipulation that saw the least number of changes were those at the intermediate level, which increased by only 1 percentage point, rising from 26% to 27% between 2020 and 2021. And this is due to, among other reasons, to the design and dissemination of the comprehensive community plans for substitution of crops and alternative development, known as PISDA, for the 8 municipalities that are not part of the PDEP subregions. Likewise, progress was made on minimum level stipulations, which increased from 39% in 2020 to 42% in 2021. During this monitoring period, the Kroc Institute also documented delays in implementation in this point, mainly the standstill of the law for differentiated criminal treatment for small-scale growers, and challenges to long-term livelihood projects in the context of substitution of crops used for illicit purposes. In addition, the legislative failure to adopt the National Drug Use Prevention Program as a high-level body, as well as the Comprehensive Care Plan for Drug Use Prevention, were also identified as challenges during this period. And moving into the point 5, agreement regarding to the victims of the conflict. During this analysis period, point 5 maintained a steady pace of implementation. Non-initiated stipulations were reduced from 19% in 2020 to 16% in 2021, and minimum level stipulations decreased from 36% to 33%. Intermediate level stipulations rose from 21% to 24%, and completed stipulations increased from 24% to 27%. And the entities that make up the Comprehensive System for Peace continued action to promote implementing their mandates during this study period. And also, this was despite persistent obstacles, including a lack of security guarantees, which hinders victims' participation and difficulties accessing information. Likewise, during this study period, the Kroc Institute recorded some actions related to comprehensive preparation measures, as well as examples of coordination between the entities that make up this comprehensive system for peace. During this study period, there was progress in the implementation of the truth component, as Gerard has mentioned a little bit about it. Specifically, the Truth Commission advanced in the preparation and dissemination actions of its final report. However, some actors of civil society identified challenges in the publication of the final report. Some actors have warned that there is a risk of not meeting the expectations of some victims and civil society organizations in terms of clarifying the truth, and therefore might not honor the trust that they have placed in the Truth Commission. The unit for the search for persons deemed as missing, known as UBPD, made progress in gathering the information necessary to establish the number of people deemed as missing and to prepare the National Registry of Graves, illegal cemeteries, and burial grounds. Also, the UBPD strengthened existing regional search plans and new plans were adopted. The report also highlights that this entity has advanced in some actions for the participatory construction of the second phase of the National Search Plan, but it has not yet been made operational. For the justice component, the Special Jurisdiction for Peace made progress in its decision-making and preparing this jurisdiction for the adoption of its first sanctions. During this period of study, relevant decisions were issued in 2 of the 7 macro cases opened by the jurisdiction as of November 2021. These cases are case number 1, which deals with illegal detention of individuals by the Parque, and case 3, extrajudicial killings presented as casualties of war by agents of state. Additionally, another important advance was that the Security Council expanded the UN verification mission's mandate in order to include verifying the compliance with and implementation of the Special Jurisdiction for Peace sanctions. For the reparation component, during this study period, the President sanctioned the law which extended the term of law 1448 of 2011, known as Victims' Law, for 10 more years. In addition, the national government promoted the updating of the goals of the comprehensive reparation policy for victims through document Compass 4031. This is a policy document whereby the increase in the number of victims included in the victims registry is recognized. In addition, as a consequence of this increase in the number of victims, it was necessary to make an adjustment in budget allocation. Finally, the component of guarantees of non-repetition move forward with the launch of the updating and strengthening of the National Plan for Human Rights Education, which includes commitments laid out in the Accord. Despite these advances, according to the Kroc Institute monitoring, there were few concrete results during this study period. This had a negative effect on implementation levels and poses a risk on the trust that the comprehensive system for peace has been built with victims and civil society organizations since its inception. Other obstacle identified is the worsening of security conditions in different regions of the country, which continues to affect the participation of victims, ex-combatants, and society in general before the entities that make up the comprehensive system for peace. Likewise, the Kroc Institute considers it necessary for the victims' unit to promote a collective reparation programs, not only to fulfill accord commitments, but also to act as a bridge for coordination with other measures mentioned in point 5 and point 1. Finally, the Truth Commission experienced difficulties in accessing information necessary to fulfill its mandate, which was another challenge identified during this study period. And about point 6, in quantitative terms, there were few changes in the implementation of this point. In total, during the analysis period, only 8 of 84 stipulations had changes that entail coding modification by the Kroc Institute. There was a progress on non-initiated stipulations, which decreased from 13% in 2020 to 8% in 2021. Changes include those brought about by measures to ensure the inclusions of candidates from ethnic groups on the Special Transitory Peace Voting District list, as Patrick was mentioning, as well as the participation and training of members of the communist parties, civil society organization, youth, women's, and ethnic organizations in the operation of the peace radio stations included in this point. However, there was also evidence of a setback in implementation at this point related to Congress' failure to pass the bill of differentiated criminal treatment for small-scale growers, as I was mentioning earlier. And then non-initiated implementation level commitments related to the annual PMI review and the CCB's territorial sessions are still lagging behind, as are considerable number of commitments from the ethnic chapter. On the other hand, commitments with minimum progress rose from 17% to 19%. This change is, in particular, is related to non-initiated stipulations that progress to the minimum level, but it is also affected by the legislative commitment on differentiated criminal treatment for small-scale growers. And I am mentioning this a lot because this is an important commitment of the agreement that needs to be accelerated. And regarding stipulations with intermediate progress in this point, a change from 15% to 14% was observed during 2020 and 2021. And this was the result of 5 peace radio stations that began operating in 2021. Also, a change in completed stipulations was observed, which increased from 55% in 2020 to 58% in 2020. This positive change was a result of commitments related to the Special Transitory Peace Voting Districts approval, the launch of interactive SIPO platform maps, and the Communications Committee that achieved 2 years of operations in which the peace radio stations agreed in point 6 and their contents were approved. That will be all.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Brenda. I think that was a great synthesis of a lot of information. And once more, I'm very happy to start seeing the first questions here in the chat, and don't hesitate to include more, because before we go into the section of questions and answers, we also want to conclude this presentation by offering several recommendations to strengthen implementation, especially during the upcoming governmental transition period. Gerard, what are those recommendations, and why is it important that they be taken seriously? I think you're still on mute. Thank you.
Yes, Josefina. Can we move on to the slide that is related to this, so that our public can see the recommendation slide, please? In our report, we essentially have gathered 3 central opportunities, recommendations for the national government, for the new incoming national government and Congress, of course, broader for the whole country, but in this window of opportunity with a new government coming in, we think that these 3 recommendations are very important. The first one is taking ownership of the Truth Commission report. The second one is reviewing and adjusting the framework plan for implementation. And the third one is further advancing regulatory implementation of the final agreement. Regarding taking ownership of the Truth Commission report, which will be issued, as we explained, next June 28th, an enormous amount of work, as many of you know, has been performed in these 4 years by the Truth Commission in Colombia, including very sensitive and sophisticated so-called encounters for truth and reconciliation. These kind of mediated sessions offered victims the opportunity to request the truth from responsible parties for their victimization. The work of the Truth Commission also included truth houses in a dozen of prioritized regions throughout the country, gathering more than 20,000 testimonies from victims and other parties, and also receiving and processing, analyzing hundreds of reports produced by victim organizations and other parts of civil society that wanted to contribute their voice and interpretation of what has happened in Colombia to the Commission. So the final report will be a vast work of information and analysis will in particular include also recommendations mainly focused on preventing repetition of the armed conflict. So regarding the revelation of these truths and recommendations, which will be polemic, we stress in the report the enormous responsibility to take ownership of these recommendations and truths by the new national government, the new Congress, political parties, civil society organizations, private sectors, and other parties, especially also regarding those recommendations that address ethnic, gender, victim, and territorial issues. So the new National Development Plan, which has to be formulated by the incoming government and approved by Congress in the second semester of this year, is one great tool to do so. Anyway, the Truth Commission has also been building a broad network of civil society organizations, both in Colombia and broader internationally. We as Kroc also participate in this, to guarantee a broader appropriation and safeguarding of the work and appropriation of the work of the Truth Commission. Our second recommendation, something we've already been speaking on, is reviewing and adjusting the framework plan for implementation, this Colombian government tool established by both parties, created by the Accord, that is a sort of monitoring and evaluation tool to keep pushing the Accord forward. Brenda presented the various PMI framework issues that are still pending. So reviewing and adjusting the PMI, the framework. I'm sorry, I'm jumping back to the Spanish acronym, but so this framework plan for implementation, reviewing and adjusting it is foreseen in the Accord, has not been happened in these first 5 years, is a great opportunity for the new government, the new Congress, and also for the people who have been elected to Congress in the 16 special peace seats, as well as for the conflict resolution body we have been speaking on, the CCV. So reviewing the current status of implementation, update the framework, articulate the new development plan with this framework, and with especially also with the agendas for further inclusion of ethnic and gender dimension, as now led by the Accord created special bodies, those for ethnic and gender implementation. Finally, the regulatory implementation of the final agreement. As said, our report is very precise on what's still needed in terms of legislation, as Patrick also has outlined in a little bit more detail. With the new Congress and coming national government, we have a window of opportunity for multi-party legislative agenda and national development plan taking on such pending regulatory issues. Such pending commitments include, as we have already explained today and in more detail in the report, among others, creating a special agrarian jurisdiction, electoral and political party reforms, and differentiated judiciary treatment of small-scale coca growers. Just a final observation regarding these opportunities and recommendations. While these three seem very much oriented towards the national government, the Congress, and so very much national oriented, we are very explicit in the report in recommending also improved territorial implementation. From our point of view, and as indicated in the report, this implies something of bringing a task force like whole of government approach to the region, to bridge the still enormous gaps in access to services and rights. In concrete terms, it means implementing the 16 roadmaps for territorial development, implementing the dozen or so national rural development plans, and implementing many other Accord-related plans that have been formulated, but it has to move much faster and effectively from paper to reality, and must do so in a broadly participatory mode, especially also in gender and ethnic terms. So to significantly advance territorial implementation and improve opportunities for environmentally sound and sustainable development and bridge these gaps, especially in the ethnic and gender one, the next government needs to bring a less centralized, less vertical, and more robust, inclusive, and closer to the people, whole of government approach to the regions.
Thank you very much, Chair. I apologize because our PowerPoint is playing tricks on us. This only happens when we're recording. When we are practicing, it of course works perfectly well. Brenda, to finalize this presentation, tell us which are the main findings then of the 6th report from the Kroc Institute. Thank you.
Yes, Josefina. So taking into account the Kroc Institute's international comparative experiences, the completion of the 5th year of implementation of the final agreement represents a fundamental milestone. During the first 5 years after signing, peace-building processes were cemented in order to build a sustainable foundation for the long-term transformations agreed upon in the Colombian Peace Agreement. The Kroc Institute observed that the implementation of the final agreement has not stopped during these first 5 years, and this is a positive result for Colombia and has been achieved despite serious internal and external obstacles. According to the Kroc Institute measurements, and as a consequence of the obstacles that arose in the 5 years since signing, the pace of implementation has not yet reached a level that guarantees the completion of a significant majority of the commitments agreed upon in the 15th year process laid out within the final agreement. Also, as I said earlier, there is a high concentration of provisions at minimal status that should be attended. During this study period, the Kroc Institute observed that the design cycle of the main public policy tools ended, and in this period occurred important advances such as the adoption of the special transitory peace voting districts, among others that we already mentioned. And another main finding identified by this report is that territorial transformation must be driven by regions with high levels of decentralization. And finally, I would conclude with the 6th year of implementation will occur in the context of challenges related to political transitions, such as the Congress and government transition.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you so much. Thank you to all the panelists, Gerard, Brenda, and Patrick. Our audience has been very patiently listening to all of us for pretty much 60 minutes. So I would like to use the remaining half an hour to go into your questions. And we are very thankful because for the launch events, we received over 100 questions in advance. So we tried to organize some of the main topics that we found common among all of them. So if I ask Patrick and Brenda to turn on your videos. Excellent, thank you. Thank you, Patrick, because I would like to start with you. So we had at least 5 questions from the public referred to the multi-purpose catastro, which is what we call in Spanish the catastro multipropósito. And I was wondering if you can expand into a more detailed presentation on the status of the implementation of the catastro, please.
Right, sure. It's the multi-purpose cadastre is a crucial tool in point 1 for the topic of land access and land use. It's designed to provide updated records of the land in Colombia, which can later be used for planning and taxation purposes. So a lot of really ripple effects that would come from a very strong, robust cadastre in Colombia. As I mentioned earlier, we saw limited progress in terms of what the government's goals were. In 2021, they were hoping to achieve 35% of the territory updated, but only reached about 15%, 10% of which were in PADET areas, so that's positive. But there are many factors that contribute to this limited progress. Concerning the centralization of the government, the cadastre is headed by the Institute Agustin Codazzi, which is a geographical institute that's really made remarkable progress. But it's a central government office. So one main challenge is decentralizing these functions to local governments. So local municipalities and offices can be trained in updating their own land records and systems. And then again, this leads to ripple effects when it comes to taxation, for example. So local governments can start to properly assess the land that they have and the people that are on the land. So it's an important opportunity for improvement going forward. It can benefit from different financial stimulus like the OCAD-PAS function in the national budgets, as well as synergies with PADET initiatives that are already designed and ready to go. There's also a recent COMPES 4044 that was passed last year that introduces a national cadastral information system. So that's something that provides a framework for this incoming administration to adopt.
Thank you, Patrick. Some of the questions that we have also received from the audience refer to the process of reincorporation of former combatants. What are our main findings in this regard in the sixth comprehensive report?
Well, Josefina, I must say that the report does a really strong job of going deep into this issue. I would again refer for readers to look at the report. But I mean, some main topics there you can find are the number of people in reincorporation are facing legal, procedural, security-related, financial, and other aspects influencing their reincorporation process. And even from the top down, I mean, we see in this report evidence of internal disagreements among party leadership during 2021. So that's something to keep an eye on, especially in the incoming administration, because it may undermine the progress that's been made so far if it's not addressed properly. But even at the territorial level, we see some headway with the territorial reincorporation councils. These councils are, there's about 50 of them all around the country, and they include about 8,500 ex-combatants. So these are sort of hubs of coordination that can really provide and could continue to provide coordination for the ex-combatant community and the communities around them. Another area that the report looks at is land access. As I mentioned earlier, this is a really unique feature that's been coming to the fore of the debate in Colombia for this community, is allowing combatants to have access to land so that their projects can be sustainable going forward. It provides an avenue for livelihood projects. Well-being, housing is another concern there. So that's something that the report dives into. There's also some analysis of the ECOMUN, which is a really important feature of the accord that allows for financial stability of the ex-combatant community. This solidarity cooperative is composed of trade associations, and that's constantly being consolidated. So hopefully in the next couple months, we might see the ECOMUN becoming a more confederated and consolidated entity that can provide its own population with a lot of incentives for livelihood projects and other things, other investments. Finally, the national reincorporation system is something that we're hoping can be launched in the next couple months. And so, yeah, I'll leave it there for now.
Thank you, Patrick. Brenda, there is a particular question about the positive practices that have been identified in the implementation of the PANIS, the National Program for the Integral Substitution of Illicit Crops. Can you explain more about the Kroc Institute's finding regarding the PANIS, please?
Well, during this study period, this program made positive progress, and I'll give you some examples. The PANIS remained active in the territories. However, implementation gaps persisted in order to achieve its objectives in a comprehensive manner. And I'll give you some information that shows that this program has been advancing despite facing numerous obstacles. For example, by November 2021, 99,097 beneficiaries were linked to this program, located in 56 municipalities in 14 departments, where 65% of the country's illicit crops are concentrated. Also, the Territorial Renewal Agency adopted the protocol for the incorporation of the gender perspective in the diagnosis, preparation, implementation, and follow-up of the PANIS. And I conclude with this advanced. However, the report provides a detailed analysis about this topic. The PANIS assisted families belonging to ethnic communities. However, these actions were not carried out under a protocol with a differential approach consulted with these communities. And this is something that the Kroc Institute also mentioned in its second special report on the ethnic approach. And in conclusion, to answer your question, this program remained active during this study period. The communities continue with their desire to substitute and build peace in their territories, but it is a program that is not exempt from challenges and difficulties, such as the serious security conditions in territory.
Thank you, Brenda. Gerard, may I ask you the following question? The Kroc Institute highlights the importance of implementation with a territorial approach. And we have a particular interest among our public in this issue. Could you comment on the report's finding on the territorial approach?
Yes, Josefina, that's a great question. It goes back to one of the cross-cutting recommendations that I mentioned, the one on the importance of bringing implementations to the regions, so to have it materialized there. So our report includes data and evidence from territorial implementation. We have mentioned some of that in this hour. For example, the role of the territorial peace councils, also during the social mobilization, the progress with 10 of the 20 regional search plan for forcefully disappeared persons, and also about the roadmaps for territorial implementation. There's now 14, I guess, today formulated, 2 lacking. And the need to implement them. However, until now, we as Kroc have essentially produced aggregated national reports about the implementation, right? This report too shows how is the implementation doing in Colombia in general, even though we give examples from the region. It's true that our specific gender and ethnic reports, and I refer you to our recent ethnic report, which is on our website. Those do include more territorial narrative about implementation. So some of that is, of course, picked up in this comprehensive national report as well. However, in our earlier reports and in this one, we continue to stress the importance of territorial implementation and better understanding what's going on, also in a differentiated manner. And so we as Kroc and our Barometer project have taken steps to improve also our capacity to analyze in a differentiated way implementation per region, let's say. So we are creating a submatrix. It's interesting for people listening to us for territorial implementation. We are in the process of installing already territorial teams in 3 regions. We hope to do this in 7. Each region includes various of the 16 prioritized territories in the country. So going forward, is actually my answer. We will proceed to be able to provide more of this kind of territorial information and differentiated regional implementation data and analysis. And not only present that to the national stakeholders, but also to present that to the people in the region. And we have actually discovered a strong and well-argued demand in the regions that go in the same direction as this question, like what's going on in territories, what kind of evidence do you have about implementation there? So going forward, we hope to include that kind of information in our 3 monthly reports, in our yearly reports, and be able to assist both regional, MESO, national, international agencies and organizations, related to the implementation that want to better understand what's going on in the regions, how can we learn among regions, and what is needed to advance territorial implementation.
Yes, thank you. We always like asking about the territorial approach that is so very important for peace building. We have one question here in the chat. Based on this report from Jimena, based on this report, what are the top 3 recommendations that you have for the next president of Colombia and the international community for bridging the existing gaps on the ethnic chapter and gender provisions? Patrick, may I ask you to help us fill in that information? Maybe Jera can complement later. Thank you.
Sure. Yeah. If anyone wants to add, just let me know. Josefina, feel free. I mean, the first thing I would look at, though, are the existing infrastructures that we have already for the gender and ethnic approaches. So, and these are fundamental pieces to the SACIVI itself. And we mentioned in our comparative analysis, we do look at how these representative bodies are actually fundamental to the SACIVI process, as well as outside observers and third-party international observers, let's say, in the SACIVI dialogues, because they provide a neutral space for tackling difficult issues, difficult political issues. So entities such as WOLA and maybe even the Carter Center are important entities that could actually contribute to the discussion of gender and ethnic issues in SACIVI, obviously in consultation and in total investment with the existing infrastructures. So that's something that could set the tone for the next 4 years going forward. So that's one thing I would mention. I don't know if anyone has anything else they want to describe. Any other opportunity? I mean, another area would be PEDET. Obviously, that's a primary vehicle for implementation going forward. So providing support for the ethnic and gender representation in the territorial peace councils, which are hubs of activity for PEDET, could be a really important investment from the outside community, and something that the executive administration too could really promote in their agenda going forward. And then finally, I guess legislative reforms is another area we mentioned earlier. That could involve some public hearings with gender and ethnic communities specifically for reforming laws such as Law 152 of 1994 that has some participatory elements in it.
Yes. Thank you, Patrick. Yes, I think that in relation to that question, and also I believe a good way of like closing and wrapping up this presentation, at the Kroc Institute, we have been involved in peace building around the world, but especially in Colombia for over 3 decades. And we know that there are a lot of questions every time we have a government transition. But at the same time, I want to assure all our viewers that the Kroc Institute is deeply committed to support and accompany all Colombians in the implementation of the final accord. And that, of course, also implies being of service to the next government to support the transition between the governments. But we will, of course, furthermore, continue monitoring work and our technical support to all implementation agencies and to international community that is deeply committed to implementation. So I think that this is also an important aspect. This is precisely during the transition period when the international community needs to make sure to say to all the peace builders, all the different civil society organizations, the incoming government, that there is this deep commitment of the international community, because this is a process of state building. This is a process of peace building that requires that we don't only invest resources, our time, energy, and financial resources for a period of 5 to 6 years, but this is at least a 15-year process. So at least until 2031, we will be looking very closely to make sure that we're able to identify what is going well, which are these so-called cuellos de botella, these spaces, these obstacles that require much more furthering. And of course, what are the opportunities that we're seeing either coming from the executive branch of power, the legislative, the judicial branch of power, the international community, the pressure, and of course the support and the accompaniment that the civil society organized both in Colombia and globally can provide, so that we're able to build this stable and long-lasting peace. In this sense, I want to thank my panelists now. I want to thank everyone who has been with us today in the seminar, on Facebook Live, and of course our team in Colombia, the technical team that has made this report possible. Everyone who trusted the Kroc Institute that provides information, that helps us triangulate our information. But also on this other side of the edition, I want to especially thank all our communications team, the editors, the translators, everyone who has been, accompanying our social media, etc., who have done a remarkable job in having this report that I hope you find on our website, and the peaceaccords.nd.eu/barometer/Colombia-reports. You will see that we have the full report in Spanish. We have the executive summary in Spanish and in English. We also have videos with beautiful images that can explain in a few minutes the main findings of the report. We have media advisories, and you will also receive in your emails a copy of this recording, and you will receive a copy of the report with all the necessary links. You have our email address if you have questions, doubts. If you want to continue the conversation, don't hesitate to contact us. All right, so have a good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being with us today.